You have had this thought before. Not a thought like it. This exact thought, the same words, or close enough to the same words, arriving in the same order, producing the same tightening in the chest, leading to the same place it always leads, which is nowhere new. You know this because you have noticed it before. You have caught yourself mid-loop and thought, here we are again. And the noticing did not stop the loop. The loop continued, as loops do, because a loop does not need your permission to run. It only needs the same conditions that started it last time. For some people, the loop is about work. The thing that was said in the meeting 3 weeks ago that you have since replayed approximately 40 times, each time finding new angles of injury or injustice that the previous 39 replays had not fully explored. For some people, it is about a relationship, the conversation that ended badly, that you keep rewriting in your head, finding the better version of what you should have said, the version that would have produced a different outcome, even though the outcome is finished, and no amount of rewriting will change it. For some people, the loop is harder to name, just a quality of the mind at certain hours, a kind of background hum of something unresolved that does not arrive as a specific thought, but as a texture, a restlessness that has been there so long it has begun to feel like a feature of the self rather than a habit of the mind. Before we begin, leave one word in the comments tonight. One word for the loop: replaying, worrying, rehearsing, spiral, stuck, whatever is most honest. Someone will read it and feel immediately less alone in it. If this channel is finding you something worth returning to, the subscribe button is there. It costs nothing. Now, let your eyes close if they are ready. Tonight, we move again between two worlds. The first is yours. A woman in Denver who has had the same argument with her mother approximately once a week for 11 years, and who lies awake the night before every visit running the argument in advance. A man in Boston who cannot stop rehearsing the conversation he needs to have with his business partner, a conversation that has been 2 weeks away for 4 months. A woman in Phoenix who notices that she apologizes in anticipation before anyone has said anything critical, because some part of her is always expecting criticism. A man in Nashville who realized, one Thursday morning at 43, that he has been having the same emotional response to being ignored for 27 years, since the first time it happened, and that the response no longer fits the situations that trigger it, but arrives anyway, on time, reliable as weather. The second world is older, a Chinese court official of the Tang period who spent 12 years noticing the exact moment his anger began, before the anger itself arrived. A Japanese abbess of the Heian era who understood that her fear of abandonment was answering questions that were not being asked. A Tibetan student of the Kagyu tradition who was given a single instruction by his teacher and practiced it for 30 years and found, at the end, that the instruction had been about something much larger than he had initially understood. A Korean monk of the Joseon period who mapped his own mind the way a cartographer maps a territory, feature by feature, and found that the map changed what was mapped. A Burmese laywoman who discovered, at 59, that the version of herself who had been hurt at 19 was still making decisions. And a very old Vietnamese teacher who was asked by a student how to stop a thought from completing itself and gave an answer so simple it took the student 15 years to understand. These stories are contemplative in nature, offered for rest and reflection, not as medical or therapeutic advice. Feel the specific quality of the mind right now. Whatever it is doing it in a body that is lying still, in a room that is dark, in a night that requires nothing of you. The loop can run. You do not have to follow it. The stories are waiting. Elena drove to her mother's house in Fort Collins every other Sunday. She had been making this drive for 11 years, since she moved back to Denver from New York. And in those 11 years, approximately 1 out of every 3 visits had ended in an argument, which meant that approximately 1 out of every 3 Saturdays, the night before the drive, Elena lay awake, running the argument in advance. She knew the argument's shape. She knew its openings, its escalations, its specific vocabulary. She knew which topics were likely to trigger it and which moods in her mother made the triggering more probable. She had developed, across 11 years, a sophisticated map of the argument's terrain. What she had not managed to develop was a way to stop running the map on Saturday nights. She lay in the dark and rehearsed. She was very good at it. She could run the argument, including all its branches and counterbranches, for anywhere between 45 minutes and 3 hours. She was aware, while doing this, that the rehearsal never helped. The actual arguments rarely followed the script she had prepared. Her mother was not working from the same script. The preparation produced anxiety without producing any corresponding reduction in the argument's probability or intensity. She had noticed this. The noticing had not stopped the Saturday nights. One Saturday, lying in the dark for the second hour, she had a thought she had not had before. She was not rehearsing for tomorrow. She was responding to something that had already happened. The argument she was running in her head was not the one that would happen tomorrow. It was the one that had happened 20 years ago, and 15 years ago, and 11 years ago, and the one that kept happening, and her mind had developed a response to it that ran automatically, like a program that loads when a certain file is opened. The file was, going to see mom. The program was, prepare for the argument. The program had been written a long time ago. It no longer matched the actual situation, which had changed over 11 years in ways the program had not been updated to reflect. Her mother was older now. The arguments happened less often than the program predicted. When they did happen, they were smaller than the versions the program prepared for. But the program ran anyway, because that is what programs do. In the city of Chang'an during the Tang dynasty, in the early 9th century, there was a mid-ranking court official named Zhong Wen, not the scholar of the poem or the minister of the gathering, but a different man who had spent 12 years of his administrative life doing something unusual. He was 51 years old. He had been, since his late 30s, a student of Chan practice, attending teachings when his official duties allowed, and sitting in meditation in the early hours before the court's day began. His teacher had given him a single instruction. The instruction was, find the moment before the anger. Not find the anger, not examine the anger, not release the anger, find the moment before it. He had been practicing this for 12 years. The anger in question was specific. It was the anger that arose when he felt overlooked by his superiors in the court hierarchy, when recognition he had expected did not arrive, when decisions were made above him without his consultation. This anger was, he understood, entirely reasonable by any ordinary standard. The situations that produced it were genuinely unfair in many cases. The anger was a natural response to natural provocation, but it was also reliably destroying his peace for hours or days at a time, and it was affecting his work and his relationships, and the natural nature of it did not make it less expensive. The instruction was to find the moment before it. For the first 3 years, he could not. By the time he noticed the anger, it was fully present. It had already arrived, occupied the space, begun its work. The noticing was always retrospective. In the 4th year, something shifted slightly. He began to catch the anger one stage earlier, not before it arrived, but as it was arriving. A physical quality in the chest, a specific tightening that preceded the full development of the emotion by perhaps a second or two. He practiced noticing this for 3 more years. By the 7th year, he could feel the tightening before the tightening became anger. Something earlier, a kind of alerting. The mind turning toward the stimulus before the response had formed. By the 12th year, he could feel the moment the mind registered the stimulus that had, in the past, produced the anger. The bare registration, before any response had formed. In that moment, which was very brief, he found something he had not expected. Space. Not much space, a very small space, but a space between the stimulus and the response that he had not known existed because he had always arrived at the situation after the response was already underway. In that small space, the response was not yet determined. The anger had not yet formed. The program had not yet run. He did not, even after 12 years, always manage to stay in that space. The program was very old and very fast, and most of the time it ran before he could notice it running. But sometimes, in the small space, something different happened, something that was not anger, something that was more like curiosity about the situation, or even, occasionally, compassion for the superior who had overlooked him, who was presumably managing his own programs. He wrote about this in a letter to a younger colleague who had come to him with the familiar complaint about a senior official who consistently failed to acknowledge his contributions. He wrote, "The anger you feel is real, and the situation that produces it is genuinely unfair. I am not asking you to feel otherwise. I am asking you to find the moment before the anger, which is where you still have a choice. After the anger has arrived, you are inside the program. Before it arrives, you are still free." Elena, on her Saturday night in Denver, had arrived at something close to the edge of this understanding. She had not yet found the moment before the program, but she had found the program. And finding the program is the beginning of finding the moment before it. You have a program. You know what starts it. You have been running it for years. Tonight, just notice it. You do not have to stop it. Just notice that it is running, and that the running is not the same as the situation that started it, and that the situation may have changed since the program was written. Let the shoulders drop now, all the way. The program can run. You are not the program. And as Zhong Wen sits in the early morning before the court day begins and finds, again, the small space before the anger, we travel now to Japan, where an abbess understood that her fear of abandonment was answering questions that were not being asked. Lisa noticed it first in a meeting. She was presenting a quarterly report to her team in Phoenix, a report she had prepared carefully, that she knew was accurate and well organized. Halfway through, before anyone had said anything critical, she said, "I know this might not be exactly what you were looking for, but..." She stopped. No one had indicated that it was not what they were looking for. No one had shifted in their seat or looked at their phone or done anything that suggested dissatisfaction. The room had been attentive. She had apologized in advance for a criticism that had not been made. She thought about this after the meeting. It was not the first time. She did it with her sister when she suggested restaurants. She did it with her partner when she expressed an opinion about where to spend the holidays. She did it with her friends when she was late, even when she was not going to be late, as a kind of preemptive apology for a tardiness that had not yet occurred and might not. She had been doing this, she estimated, for her entire adult life. The question was, what was she apologizing for? She sat with this in her car, in the parking garage after the meeting. The criticism she was preemptively apologizing for was not present in the room. It was present somewhere else, in a room she carried with her, a room from a long time ago, where criticism had been reliable enough that preparation for it was always warranted. That room no longer existed anywhere, except in her anticipation of it. But the preparation ran anyway. In a small convent attached to a larger temple complex in the hills east of Kyoto, in the early 11th century, during the Middle Heian period, there was an abbess named Eishun, not the poet of the 300 poems, but a practitioner of 20 years who had come to the abbess role at 38 and who had developed, across her 2 decades of practice, an unusual speciality. She understood fear, not in the sense of being fearless, in the sense of having examined her own fear with the specific attention that serious practice makes available, until she understood its structure. The fear she had examined was the fear of abandonment. It had been with her since childhood, in the specific form that fear of abandonment takes, which is not the constant experience of abandonment, but the constant preparation for it, the anticipation, the monitoring, the reading of small signals in other people's behavior for evidence of the withdrawal that was, in the fear's framework, always approaching. She had spent 12 years examining this in meditation. What she found, over those 12 years, was something that surprised her. The fear was not responding to the present. The fear was responding to a set of conditions that had existed in her past with genuine force, conditions in which the monitoring and the anticipation and the preemptive adjustment had been genuinely useful. The fear had been built from real experience. It was a reasonable response to unreasonable circumstances. But the circumstances had changed. She was no longer in the situation that had required the monitoring. She was the abbess of a small convent. She had students who valued her teaching, and colleagues who respected her judgment, and a daily life organized around practice rather than the conditions that had originally built the fear. The fear did not know this. The fear was still monitoring for abandonment, in a context where abandonment was not the primary danger. It was reading the behavior of her students for signs of withdrawal. It was interpreting ordinary variation in their attention as evidence of the withdrawal it was always expecting. It was answering questions that were not being asked, because those questions had once been important, and the part of her that had learned to monitor for them had not been told that the situation had changed. She described this to her own teacher, an older nun who had been practicing for 40 years. The teacher listened. Then she said, "The fear is not wrong. The fear was right, once, for the situation it was built in. The mistake is not that the fear exists. The mistake is that it has not been told that it can rest." She paused. You cannot argue with the fear. You cannot tell it that the situation has changed and expect it to believe you. It was built from experience, and it trusts experience more than explanation. What you can do is give it new experience. Small, repeated experiences of the situation not producing what it is prepared for. Over time, slowly, the monitoring will soften. She paused again. But first you have to notice that it is monitoring. You have to find it. The finding is everything. You cannot update a program you do not know is running. Lisa, in her car in the Phoenix parking garage, had found the program. She did not yet have a name for it, but she had found it, which was further than she had been that morning. The criticism she was apologizing for in advance lived in a room from a long time ago. The room she was actually in was different. Let the program know, tonight, that it can rest, not forever, just for tonight. The situation it was built for is not the situation you are in. Let the face be soft. Let the chest be open. The monitoring can pause. And as Eishun sits in the convent garden and gives her fear the new experience of a night that produces nothing it was prepared for, we come now to the last story. To a man in Nashville and a Vietnamese teacher who gave an answer so simple it took 15 years to understand. David was 43 when he noticed it. He was driving to work in Nashville on a Thursday morning, listening to nothing, which was unusual for him. He usually had the radio on or a podcast playing. The silence was accidental. He had forgotten to connect his phone. In the silence, he noticed something he had not noticed before, or had noticed but not registered. When another driver cut him off in traffic, something happened in his body before he was aware of it. A tightening, a heat, a readiness. Something that arrived complete, that did not develop gradually, but was simply there, fully formed, by the time his conscious mind arrived at the scene. The conscious mind then added the narrative, the judgment about the other driver, the particular variety of contempt he reserved for careless driving, the brief fantasy of consequences the other driver should experience. But the emotional response had arrived before the narrative. The narrative was commentary on something that had already happened. He sat with this at a red light. He thought about the last time he had felt that specific combination of tightening and heat and readiness. It was when his business partner had dismissed his idea in a meeting last week. And before that, when his wife had said, in a tone he interpreted as dismissive, that she did not think the trip he was planning was practical. And before that, many times before that, going back as far as he could remember, the response to being ignored or dismissed or cut off, in traffic or in meetings or in marriage, was always the same response, the same tightening, the same heat, the same readiness. He was 43 years old. He had been having this response since he was 16, when he first understood that his father was not going to take him seriously regardless of what he did. 27 years. The same response to the same perceived dismissal, in traffic and in boardrooms and at kitchen tables, because some part of him was still 16 and still in the room with his father, and still producing the response that had been the only available response then. The light changed. He drove. He was not angry. He was something more interesting than angry. He was seeing the program for the first time while it was running. In a monastery in the hills above Hue in central Vietnam, in the early years of the 20th century, there was a teacher named Thich Quang Hien who was known for a single question he asked every student who came to him. Not a koan, a question, simple, direct, asked at the beginning of the student's time with him and returned to at intervals across however long the student practiced under his guidance. The question was, where does the thought begin? Every student understood this differently. The young students, who were new to practice, understood it as an instruction to watch for the origin point of thoughts. They would sit and watch and try to catch the thought forming, to find the exact moment it arose from nothing. They could not find it. The thought was always already there by the time they noticed it. They reported this to the teacher. He nodded and asked the question again. Where does the thought begin? The more advanced students understood it differently. They understood it as a question about the nature of consciousness itself, about where the arising comes from, about the mystery of experience. They gave him philosophical answers. He listened to these answers and nodded and asked the question again. One student had been practicing under him for 15 years. He was by this point a senior practitioner, someone who taught others, someone whose own practice had produced genuine and visible changes in the quality of his presence and attention. One morning he came to the teacher and said, "I think I understand the question now." The teacher waited. The student said, "The thought does not begin. The thought arrives already formed. What begins is the noticing. And the gap between the thought's arrival and the noticing, that gap is where I am not present. That gap is where the program runs without me. The practice is not to find where the thought begins. The practice is to shorten the gap, to arrive sooner in my own mind, to be present earlier in the sequence, before the thought has already become a reaction. The teacher looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Now ask the question to yourself every day for the rest of your life, and the answer will keep changing." He paused. The mind you have been running for 30 years is not the mind you were born with. It is a mind shaped by everything that has happened to you, and everything you have responded to, and every pattern that was useful once and became a habit and is now running on its own. This is not a problem. This is what a mind is. The practice is not to get a different mind. The practice is to be present in the mind you have early enough in the sequence that you can occasionally choose something different. He looked at the student. The gap is very small, but it is real, and it is always available. Even in the middle of the oldest loop, there is a moment, brief and easily missed, where the next step has not yet been determined. That moment is what we are practicing for. David, driving in Nashville, had found the gap. Not intentionally, in the silence of a car with no podcast playing, on an ordinary Thursday morning, he had arrived early enough in his own sequence to see the program running. He did not change the program that morning. That is not how programs change. Programs change slowly, through repeated noticing, through the accumulation of small moments of arriving early enough to see what is happening before the response is complete. But he had seen it, and seeing it was different from not seeing it. The loop runs, the program runs. This is what minds do. The question is not whether it runs, the question is whether you are present when it does. And presence, in the mind, means arriving before the response is finished, even one stage earlier, even one breath earlier. That is the practice. Tonight, it is enough. We have been in two worlds tonight. The world you know, Elena in Denver, lying awake the night before her mother's house, running an argument that had been written before most of the visits had happened. Lisa in Phoenix, pre-apologizing for criticisms that had not been made, in a room full of people who had not yet said anything. And David in Nashville, driving in silence on a Thursday morning and finding, in a gap that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, that the response to being dismissed had been arriving before he knew it was arriving, and that it had been arriving the same way for 27 years. And the older world, where a Tang official spent 12 years finding the moment before the anger and discovered, in a very small space, that the response was not yet determined, where a Heian Abbess understood that her fear was answering questions that no longer needed answering, and learned to give it the experience of a night that produced nothing it was prepared for, and where a Vietnamese teacher asked the same question for 50 years and gave a student 15 years to understand that the answer was about arriving earlier in your own mind. Two worlds, the same loop. The loop you have been running is real. The emotion it produces is real. The pattern was built from real experience in real situations that required exactly this response. It is just old. Old does not mean wrong. Old means it was written for conditions that may have changed. Old means the program is running on data from a situation that is no longer exactly the situation you are in. The practice is not to stop the loop. You cannot stop the loop by deciding to stop it. The practice is to arrive earlier, to find the moment before the response is complete, to be present in your own mind a single stage sooner than you were yesterday. That is enough. That is the whole practice. Tonight, in this dark, the loop may be running. Let it run. You do not have to follow it to its conclusion. You can simply notice it is running. Notice the tightening, or the heat, or the familiar quality of the familiar thought. And in the noticing, find the small space. Not after the response, in the middle of it. Just the noticing. That is the gap. That is the moment before the moment. That is what we have been practicing for across every story in tonight's world. Let the breath be one breath, just this one, arriving and leaving without producing any response at all. Just breath, just this. The loop can finish itself. You have already arrived somewhere new. Let the names dissolve. Elena, Lisa, David, Zong Wen, the Abbess, Tich Quang Hien. What remains is the noticing. Just this. Awake enough to see the loop running. Quiet enough to let it run without following. That is the whole of tonight's teaching. And it is enough. If sleep is reaching for you now, let it come. The loop will still be there tomorrow. So will the gap. Good night. You are not the loop. You are the one who noticed. Before you go, one small thing. I made this channel because I believe that being present in your own mind, even one stage earlier, even one breath sooner, changes everything about how a night feels. If tonight gave you one moment of noticing the loop without following it, I am genuinely glad. Leave one word in the comments if you feel like it. One word for the loop your mind runs. Someone will read it and recognize it immediately. And if the quiet Dharma is somewhere you want to return, the subscribe button is there. It costs nothing, it just means the next time a night like this one comes, this will be waiting. Good night. You are not the loop. You are the one who noticed.